we all have a drum roll, please? Our Rotarian of the month for all the hard work he does is John O'Keefe, helping with our speakers and all. John, you are our Rotarian of a month. Do we have a short speech here? Take yourself off mute. John, you still there?
I'm here, yeah.
Okay, great.
Can you send me my pin?
Yes,
so I can
we'll
wear
send you your pen. We'll send you a pen.
it? Okay. Thank you, guys. I'm very impressed. I'm embarrassed. Yeah.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
I take it you're introducing our guest here today?
I am. Are you ready?
Take the floor.
Okie dokie. I'm going to start out by talking about the Johnson family. That would be Peter Johnson's mother and father, Dick and Barbara Johnson, who are very, very dear friends of ours and live in the Westwood Hills neighborhood. Matter of fact, they live right across the street from Tom Barron.
That's right.
That must have been a tough life there, but anyway, they live right across the street from Tom. And anyway, they were dear, dear friends of ours, and I described them as kind of Renaissance people. That would be Dick and Barbara Johnson. They knew about everything. Well, then along comes Peter, along with two brothers and a sister. And Peter, I'd say about him, the apple didn't fall far from the tree. So Peter is a very literary person in his own right and somewhat of a Renaissance man also. He grew up in Westwood. He attended St. Paul the Apostle School, and then he went to Loyola High, so he got some Jesuits in there. And then he went to University of Colorado, probably on a skiing scholarship, I don't know. But anyway, for his college degree, and then he went to Pepperdine for a master's, where he was, get this now, a Keck scholar at Pepperdine. After school, he did a number of things, including working at IBM as a salesman. So he probably learned how to be a pretty good salesman working for IBM. But then he sooner or later, found his true love, which was teaching English at Palisades High School. He just retired from there and is now pursuing a new career of reading good literature. I now introduce Peter Johnson.
Thank you very much, John. Wait, hold on, let me. Okay, wait a second. I'm just. Okay. Can everybody see me? Okay.
Yes, we can see you. If you need to,
Yes.
are you a co-host? Do you need to screen share?
Should I screen share? Okay.
Oh, do you need to? Do you have a PowerPoint or something?
No, I don't. Okay, I think I'm fine. I think it's fine. Okay, anyway, thank you very much, John, for that kind introduction. I'm excited to address the Westwood Rotary. Hello, Tom Barron, fellow Tavistock Avenue, lived up the street from us. I do want to say one thing about John O'Keefe. He started a very successful book club, which I'm a member of. I've been a member 3 years. He refers to me as a junior member, so I don't know exactly what that means. But at any rate, what I wanted to talk to you about today was the power of reading. And, you know, one of the things about reading is that it can change your life. I'm going to first make some observations about my experience teaching 36 years. The last 21 years was at Palisades Charter High School. So my first 10 or 15 minutes, I'm going to talk about my observations. Then I'm going to ask you about a book that you found particularly inspiring or impactful. And then after that, I'm going to talk about the reading habits of some successful people that you have heard of. Starting with, when I first started teaching, I was assigned to a predominantly African-American school. And I thought, you know, I'm going to teach Catcher in the Rye because that was a immensely enjoyable book for me when I was at Loyola High School. And I was shocked to find out how unsuccessful I was. And I think it was largely because of the background of the students that I had. So I've learned that teaching has to be relatable. You have to be able to see yourself in the characters. And many of you probably read Catcher in the Rye. And the main character is a kid who goes to an all-white boarding school from a wealthy family. He lived on Park Avenue. He has all this spending money. And the kids were just sort of like, this isn't somebody we know, or we don't even know anyone that goes to a boarding school. They had a difficult time with it. So I segued from that to I taught the Autobiography of Malcolm X, which was very relatable to them. And I also, interestingly enough, Tennessee Williams wrote a play called A Streetcar Named Desire, and they could relate to Stanley Kowalski, who was a sort of tough blue collar guy. So I think that's one of the things that I've learned. When it comes to literature, education, as I said, has to be engaging. At the moment, 85% of Black males in the 4th grade are not reading at grading level. Another statistic is less than 2% of teachers in the United States are Black males. 72% of Black children are born out of wedlock. So these young students especially need to find something that's inspiring, relatable, engaging. And a lot of you can remember when you were young, you were reading Hardy Boys, or if you were a girl, you were reading the Nancy Drew mystery stories. And they were these engaging stories that we could relate to and look forward to reading about. One of the things I learned, I started teaching Macbeth to about, my first time I did it was about 20 years ago when I first started teaching at Palisades High School. And I realized even with kids in honors class who have educated parents, you have to sell some literature. And I remember feeling, I guess my background in sales was important. I haven't really thought about it too much, but you have to be a little bit of a Cal Worthington. I don't know if you remember Cal Worthington so it was a car salesman, but you have to really project this idea. I used to tell kids in my class, you're going to read Macbeth and you're going to remember it the rest of your lives. Now this sounds a little bit like it might be exaggeration or hyperbole, but when you tell it,
Open next.
are you okay? Is everybody, can you hear me? So you have to project a sense of what you're doing is extremely important. And I think that was, it was something I always remembered. Now, it's often said that you can tell a lot about a person by looking at their bookshelf. And I think that is actually a real truism. There's a writer, in 2012, there's a writer, Anne Morgan. She was a British intellectual, still is, author, blogger, professor. And she was looking at her bookshelf and she said to herself, you know, I consider myself this cultured, sophisticated person, but am I really? All of the authors in my bookshelf are North American writers or British writers. So she embarked on this interesting journey where she decided she was going to read a book from every country in the world. And at that time, in 2012, there were 196 identified countries by the United Nations. So she read 196. Now, some of them were novels, some of them were collections of short stories, some of them were memoirs. And after that period, and because of the internet, she was able to connect with all these writers around the world and find some of the best literature from each country. She wrote a book, it was called Reading the World, Confessions of a Literary Explorer. And Anne Morgan says, of course, it's not the same as living in the country, visiting the country, but what it did for her, she says in her own words, it made me see the world through the eyes of other people. The books I read made me more alive than ever before to the richness, diversity, and complexity of our remarkable planet. And she said some of the funniest books were from the European writers, and some of the most interesting humor, it was dark humor, but it came from the Eastern European authors and Russian writers. And what she was surprised was the amount of feminist writers from Africa, like different countries in Africa. And some of those authors were male writers from Africa writing with a feminist perspective. So I think now is a good time, before I tell you what book changed Oprah Winfrey's life, now is a good time. Maybe some of us can suggest a book for each other, or a book that was impactful or powerful. Does anybody have any particular book that they might want to suggest? And then after that, I'll continue and tell you what these famous writers, what they read. Is that John? I think you need to unmute.
Okay, I just wanted to mention Macbeth. Not that I would say it's impactful, but perhaps it is. I've read it before. I know you suggested it that to your students that everybody should read Macbeth. In Macbeth, I believe at the end, everybody is dead, I believe.
Yeah.
There may be one person left. But anyway, our granddaughter, Georgia, who lives in San Francisco, just read Macbeth. She's 11 years old. And they did a little play of Macbeth, a part of it. And she played Macbeth, and she was stabbed at the end by Macduff or somebody like that. And I just think Abe Lincoln's favorite Shakespeare play was Macbeth. I think people should all read Macbeth. That's all I'd say.
I was going to say Macbeth has a very strong female character, Lady Macbeth.
Yeah.
And so I think that, in a way, is a good play for a woman to read.
Yeah.
She's very smart, savvy, calculating, cunning. Not to say women are tyrannical. Nobody, I'm not saying that. But she's an interesting character. Anybody else? Oh, I think we have another.
Oh, Gabriel.
Yeah, I'm all for the classics, but I think the kids really engaged in reading. I think you need to give them some authors from the 20th century, like anything from John Fonte, anything from Charles Bukowski, William Burroughs. I just think some of the stuff that you give them to read from 18th, 17th, 16th century, it's just not engaging to them. And I just really believe that you have to start exposing these kids to more modern authors that they can relate to. I've started, there's some kids up in PMC where I have a weekend house. And I started buying some of the kids' books that they picked, and I buy them for them, and then they share them amongst each other until they need new ones. But I would let them pick the books, something that they can relate to, something engaging. And I kind of am more in the school of give these kids something more modern to read so that they can kind of more relate to them. So that's my thought.
Anybody else?
I'll say, when I was in high school, of course, the Vietnam War was going on and hot and heavy, and there were protests at Linfield College in McMinnville, Oregon, and Portland State and Oregon State and all over. And I read Catch-22, which was about another war, about World War II. But I knew it was a pretty quirky book and everything, but that kind of like really changed my perspective of that when I was reading it and looking at the news and comparing things and all of that. So that's a book that stood out in my mind. And then much later, when I was like in my 30s, I actually met Joseph Heller. And so that was interesting, to meet him.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
One last thing I was going to say in defense of J.D. Salinger. He's sold 65 million books. You can make the argument he only wrote one good book. I just found it interesting, though, that it sells 500,000 books a year now. So even though he wrote the book in 1951, I mean, that's 70 years ago. It's amazing that any book can hold up for 70 years. But I agree with the Rotarian, who suggested, writers like Fonte, Bukowski. I'm not sure if Bukowski would pass all the test. In other words, to be taught, but he'd be a very interesting writer. Maybe I can now talk about some interesting personalities and their books and their choice of books. Now, if you Google the reading habits of successful people, all these billionaires come up. So I apologize for having to use half my examples are from these, but that's they reveal some interesting things. Starting with Elon Musk. Elon Musk, when he was a young man, he read exclusively science fiction. He claims he would read up to a day. He also read the entire Encyclopedia Britannica when he was 9 years old. It was through books that Musk learned how to build a rocket. In 2001, Musk was about 30 years old, and he decided he was going to travel to Russia and buy 3 rockets. But Russia kept upping the price of the rockets. So soon they said, we'll sell you the rockets, but it'll cost you $62 million. So it was at that point that he decided, no, I'm not going to spend $62 million. I'm going to teach myself how to build a rocket. That's really the beginning of SpaceX. So he's not a rocket scientist by training. As a matter of fact, he went to the University of Pennsylvania and he got a bachelor's degree in economics and a bachelor's degree in physics. But whenever anyone asks him, how did you learn to build these space traveling rockets? He says 3 words: I read books. Now, he did have a very aerospace consultant, Jim Cantrell, and he borrowed all of Jim Cantrell's books. So it is helpful to have a mentor, but it just shows what a person could do if they are just determined to do something. Now, one of the things about Musk, he's a futurist. So even from being a very little boy, he was thinking about the future. And he joined these other brilliant people. He followed other brilliant futurists, namely Henry Ford, Nikola Tesla, Gene Roddenberry, who created Star Trek. All of them, by the way, incidentally, they have one thing in common: they're all engineers. Thomas Edison used to say, I read everything I can get my hands on. Gene Roddenberry loved science fiction. And he decided to create Star Trek when he was sitting in a movie theater. He was 35 years old, and he saw a movie called Forbidden Planet. And it's then that he came up with the idea of Star Trek. And he decided that the character of Spock, he identified, he was working for the police department at the time, and there was a Chief Parker, and he thought Chief Parker had a lot of the same similarities as Spock. Anyway, little thing there. Now, moving on to Oprah Winfrey. Now, Oprah Winfrey has done more than anyone in regard to literacy and appreciating books. She learned to read at the age of 2.5. And she used to read to her church congregation when she was this little girl, 2.5 years old. She considers reading to be a sacred indulgence. She says, books allowed me to see a world beyond the front porch of my grandmother's shotgun house. Now, Oprah says that the book that changed her life was The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. And I have to be honest, I mean, he's a major writer. I always thought he might have been associated with a cult, had something to do with a space age religion, a new age religion. But now I have to read it. I'm sort of thinking, well, that was the book that changed Oprah's life. And Oprah is everyone. And, I have to read that now. Now, there's a writer named Mortimer Adler, and he wrote a book called How to Read a Book. And he identifies 2 different kinds of reading. One's passive reading, and the other is this more engaged reading, more like serious reading, whether it can even be technical reading. The one person who probably does more serious reading, and I would say not reading for pleasure, but it's pleasurable to him, would be Warren Buffett. When Warren Buffett was giving a speech to Columbia University Business, they asked him, "Can you please give us a reading list, 9 very books that are interesting to you or important to you?" And all of these books were about business or investment problems. And that's what he says. I find it enjoyable to think about business or investment problems. He also said that he reads 500 pages a day. Maybe, I don't know if he's still reading 500 pages a day, but he's gone on record as reading 500 pages a day. I know Warren Buffett starts his day reading 6 newspapers. So he starts with the Wall Street Journal, then he reads the Financial Times, and he reads then he reads 4 other newspapers. Now, some of the reading that he does, frankly, I would have a hard time reading. Like, he owns 10% of Coca-Cola, but he's always looking at Coca-Cola and Pepsi, comparing them, and looking at their cash flow, looking at their return on earnings, things like that. So of all the examples I looked at, his was probably the one that I think the fewest amount of people would be able to duplicate. And he even says, "Few of you," he goes, this is an exact quote when he was speaking at Columbia University, "I read 500 pages a day. That's how knowledge works. It builds up like compound interest. All of you can do it, but I guarantee not many of you will do it." He finds it enjoyable. Now, another person who's a prodigious reader is Gloria Steinem, leading voice of the American feminist movement. She's a prodigious. This is what she has to say about books. "Books were my escape. I didn't really go to school full time until I was 10 or so. And I just read everything. I read the Nancy Drew Hardy Boys, anything about horses, grown-up novels. She loves anything about the Bronte sisters. She likes to focus on writers who makes the invisible visible." Steinem is truly a multicultural reader, just like Anne Morgan. Many of her favorite writers are contemporary feminist writers, and many of these writers are from India, South Africa, South America. So there's somebody, she reads the world too. Finally, Jonathan Rose recently wrote a book about Winston Churchill. It was called The Literary Churchill. Not everybody knows Winston Churchill won the Nobel Prize in 1953. Ernest Hemingway won it in 1954. So he was a very impressive competition. The author says that Winston Churchill's political agenda was somewhat parallel to his political agenda. He was very much influenced by what he read and what he wrote. He was an advocate, and a lot of his reading resulted in being a big advocate for social welfare, prison reform, how he responded to the Irish Rebellion. Churchill's favorite authors: George Bernard Shaw, H.G. Wells, science fiction, Margaret Mitchell, George Orwell, Oscar Wilde. Churchill was a passionate theater goer. And the way he saw his life, according to Rose, his biographer, he was driven in life to frame a thrilling story for himself. He saw life as a drama with him in the starring role. His speeches, and I think this is where he was pretty much affected by the amount of theater he went to. His speeches, especially during World War II, were theatrical and powerfully delivered. Hitler also was a consummate actor, and in 1940, Churchill was the only world leader capable of upstaging him. So it's my belief reading can certainly change your life. That's pretty much all I have.
Well, thank you very much, Peter. That's really fascinating. Does anybody have any questions? Take yourself off mute and speak up because I can't. Well, let me see. Maybe I can go to gallery now.
Peter.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, Rowan.
Bill Rowan.
Mhm.
Give me a good book. Right now I'm reading Peril, which I think is really exciting.
Well, I would say The Road to Character by David Brooks. That's a book. John, do I have the right title to that?
Yeah, that's right. The Road to Character by David Brooks. That's a very good book.
And I think why that's a great book is that as you get a little bit older, you start thinking about certain values. And he talks about eulogy value. That's what your best friend would say at your funeral. And then he also talks about the resume values. And that's basically what you've spent your life, why you're of value to society, what your net worth is. But really he talks about why eulogy values are more important. So it's a very provocative book. That's one book I can think of.
That's very good. I have a group, we have a lunch, and now I have them all giving a bio eulogy on themselves.
Yeah, interesting.
Better to do that when we have a meeting with old friends than reading it in the Times. On
I
Saturday.
agree.
Right.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. Good. Yeah. Any other questions?
I had a comment or two. I guess if you go back in years, there was a lot more reading that was done. For example, what did people do in the evening? And radio didn't come along until probably the 30s and 40s. And you see shots of people sitting in an easy chair, a guy smoking a peep or something and reading. And now you have all these sporting events on TV and that sort of thing. I guess my question is, where do people get time to do all the reading? For example, just trying to read the daily newspapers. I mean, you have the LA Times. I read the Wall Street Journal. I subscribe to The Economist. And then there's just not enough time to do a lot of reading. I don't know how much time people spend reading these days. How about exercise, going to the gym? That's not reading.
Yeah. Well, I would say that the attention span for teenagers, talking about teenagers, is a lot smaller than it was even 20 years ago, because of everybody's got a smartphone that they're looking at, and they're reading. If they are reading a newspaper, a lot of people are reading it online. And I think that that's a kind of a sad statement that the media, for all the benefits of technology, it's really hurt in terms of people reading a book and reflecting on something that could be very worthwhile. That's a good point. That's a good point. I don't think people are reading as much as they used to.
I just want to go back to my point is that the reading list for the high school and junior has seemed to have been the same for the past 40 years. I just find it hard to believe that they can't come up with more modern literature and have a modern reading list that's be more engaging. I mean, sure that you don't want to forget about the class. I used to own a bookstore, for goodness sakes. So I know about classic literature. I know the importance of it. But to get these kids involved, we've got to update our reading list and maybe sprinkle in some of the older classics. But we've got to come up with a more modern, comprehensive reading strategy to get these kids reading and really excited about reading again. Because if you have the same reading list, the poor teachers have been teaching the same stuff, the English teachers, 15, 20, 30 years. I mean, that's got to get old after a while. And I don't know, I think we need an overhaul in our reading list that we have for our junior high schools and high schools. So
No, I totally agree. It's called core literature. So I can speak just for Palisades High School. You have in 9th, 10th, and 11th and 12th grade, you have to teach certain works and certain books. and then you have a little bit of flexibility to teach some other things too. But for example, in 9th grade, every 9th grader at Palisades High School reads Julius Caesar. In the 10th grade, or actually 9th grade is Romeo and Juliet. 10th grade, they have a choice between either Julius Caesar or Macbeth. So you're so right. But some of it has to do with money. You see, they already have bought these books. And as you know, kids, they don't pay for books. So the turnover is partly economically driven. So you would have to, sometimes it has to do with the budget, the flexibility. It's not as what it could be at a private school.
Yeah, but I just think, if Palisades came to me and said, we need 30 copies of this such a book from an author from the 70s, right, I'd buy it for them. I say, you want 30 copies of this book to introduce the students to a new author? I'd buy it for them. They've got to get out there and start fundraising. They got to go out and ask the community, will you help us buy new books so we can introduce new authors to people? I mean, how many times does the English teacher
Rotary Club there too.
Yeah,
John,
how many-
Barron, do you have a quick question?
how many times does the teacher want to teach Julius Caesar? How many times does he want to teach that? 30, 40 years in a row?
That's another issue. Why don't we get on to books?
Yeah.
Hey, Peter?
John Barron and then Michael Newman. We have about 5 minutes left.
Oh, I think I know Michael Newman, I think. I don't.
Everybody knows Mike Newman.
Oh, you want St. Paul's? Yeah, of course. And Loyola.
Right.
Mike Newman, do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Yeah, I was going to say, Peter, great to see you. I was a year behind Peter at both places, and I ended up in school in Colorado as well. But Peter, with what we were talking about technology, my first question is, will libraries continue? What do you see happening in the future? And maybe who are 2 or 3 of your best current authors that you like to read?
Well, I would say that the answer to your first question, libraries are getting high tech, like at Palisades High School. They have 40 or 50 laptops. So they're able to access a lot of literature that's not even in the library itself. So they're going more and more to digital, things like that, being able to read what's in the library at UCLA, things like that. So they do have access to all these other formats. And one of the books that I enjoyed, I do sometimes like books that on World War II, like The Longest Day by Cornelius Ryan. I like that. Let me think. I just read a book called Inside Comedy by David Steinberg, which I thought was very interesting. I have an interest in comedy. I did read, I'm almost ashamed to admit this, I did read Woody Allen's autobiography, where he said that his parents only agreed on 2 things, Hitler and his report cards. So anyway, a little comedy, a little levity there. Let me see, what else have I been reading? I'm in a book group. John, what have we read in our book group?
John, you're on mute. Unmute yourself.
Oh,
John? Yeah.
I'm off now, yeah. We just read am I okay now? We just read a what's it called? Hemingway book, which I thought was excellent.
Farewell to Arms.
Yeah, that was great. A great book, yes. What else have we read recently? We're going to read the recent one. We're going to read the bridge over
River Kwai?
bridge of not River Kwai. The bridge of what? The Bridge of San Luis Rey. That's a classic by Thornton Wilder. We read all kinds of things. We read mostly fiction, though. Mostly fiction. I did want to comment about one thing Ed Galt was speaking about, and that's people are reading less today, which I think is true, and they don't have enough time, which I think is true. You definitely have to prioritize, and TV sure gets in the way. So you got to cut back somehow on TV if you're going to be a reader. And subscriptions, I asked you at all those ones that you cited, Ed, and I just had to start cutting some of them out, you know what I mean? And you have to learn how to read the papers faster, which is what I do. So, but it's priorities. You got to say to yourself, reading is important for me, so I'm going to have to do less of something else.
Okay, can I ask a question?
Yes.
Peter, what are you reading right now, this minute?
Right now, let me see, what am I reading right now?
And Mark Royalgo just held up a book. What was that? Can you just see the name? It's hard to read. Oh, The Memories of Glickle of Haman. Okay.
So
Memoirs of, okay.
I'm reading The Bridge of San Luis Rey by Thornton Wilder.
Mhm.
And I'm also reading a book called 7-Story Mountain by Thomas Merton. Those are 2 books I'm reading. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. And as a token of our appreciation for your wonderful presentation, as you can see, everybody's very interested in what you have to say. We are making, in your name, a contribution to the Westwood Village Library. So thank you very much for being with us today. It was wonderful.
Go libraries. Go libraries.
That's right.
Yes.
Anyway,
Thanks very
it was a
much, Peter.
pleasure. I enjoyed doing it very much. Thank you.
Okay, and so everybody have a wonderful Thanksgiving next Thursday. Remember, no meeting. Nobody wants to go to a Rotary Club meeting on Thanksgiving. So we'll see you the week after, okay? And happy Thanksgiving to everybody. Bye-bye.
Happy Thanksgiving. Thank you.